So we just got done talking about about compound assignment operators, which let us modify a variable's value relative to whatever it was before, instead of just assigning, which is sort of like assigning it a new value, but not quite. Let's just be a little bit more flexible. The most common way that we'll adjust a variable's value is by increasing it or decreasing it by 1. And so when we do this, if we want to do this, we use the unary operator. Okay. So when you use the unary operator, we add either a plus plus or a minus minus before or after a variable name to increase, which is the plus plus, or decrease, minus minus, that variable by 1. We have two ways that we can do this. We can put it after, which is called the postfix. What the postfix does is it completes the expression with the current value and then does the modifications. Or we can put it before, which is called the prefix. And if we do that, if we do it that way, we increase or decrease the variable's value, and then we perform the operation in question. So with a postfix, you might do something that looks sort of like this, right? We have int x equals 12, int y is equal to x plus plus. So since it's the postfix, we take the current value of x, which is 12, assign it to y, and then after we're done with that, particular operation, we increase the value of x by 1. So at the end of this line, y is 12, x is 13. And it works the same way with the decrement, which is when you go down. It would be if this were an x minus minus, then you'd have y is 12, x is 11. So it's almost the same. It's just decreasing rather than increasing. When we prefix, that is to say if we put the plus plus before, then what that means is that we increment, or in this case decrement, or in some cases decrement our variable, and then we perform the operation. So if we do something like int y is equal to 73, then int z is equal to plus plus y, then what that'll do is we'll increase the value by 1, so now it's 74, and then assign that to z. So both y and z are 74. And it's important to note with the prefix and the postfix, with these unary operators, that you can only attach them to variables. You can't attach them to numbers. You couldn't do something like 73 plus plus, as we can't increase the value of 73. We can only increase the value of that's stored inside a variable. Okay, so with unary operators, sometimes things get a little funky. I'm sorry for the line break here. Let's say we have int num is equal to 10, and then int result is equal to num plus 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 num plus num minus minus plus minus minus num. Okay, so let's say we have something like that. One way that this might manifest itself, and actually I'm going to switch this so that it isn't. I'm just going to switch this view. It'll be a little bit easier to see. We have the num plus 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 num minus minus plus minus minus num. And we want to know what's stored in result. And we want to be able to predict how that gets stored. So the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to deal with that addition. Okay, that's the first thing that's going to happen. We have a postfix and we have a prefix. The prefix happens before we add. So we're going to increase the value of num from 10 to 11. We still haven't added anything, so our running total is 0, but our value of num is 11. And then we'll add. So we're adding num. We keep the plus plus since that's a postfix. We save it for after we're done adding. Num plus this value of num, which gives us 11 plus 11, so that's 22. At the end of this step, our value of num is 11. Then we do the postfix, that postfix increment. So our value of num is 12. This doesn't change our running total because we've already done this addition. That addition has already been done. It does, however, change the value of num. So when we get over here, things are going to be a little trickier. Okay, so from here, we've taken care of all this. That's done with. And now we have this plus num minus minus. Okay, we have a postfix here, which means that we're going to add the current value, which is which in this case is going to be 11, and then we're going to decrease. We're going to add the current value, which in this case would be 12, going into this because we go from 10 or 11 to 12. So we'll add that current value. So we went from 22 to 34. So that's a 12. And then we do the minus minus. And at the end of that minus minus step, our value of num is 11. Then finally, we handle this last step, right? That minus minus num. So we go from 11 to 10. Then we add that on with a total of 44. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit tricky to kind of visualize. And normally, and this is a thing where you might be thinking to yourself, gosh, why would we ever do that? That's a really sadistic thing to do. And the answer is, of course, yeah, of course. It's very, very sadistic. But it's a thing that's worth noticing. So I'm going to show you real fast just some basic unary operators. Okay? So this is, I'll show you the code here in a second. So we start with 47. We do an a++ by itself. A is just our variable. So our new value is 48. Now we print out plus plus a. So it's going to increase and then print. So we have a 49. We'll do a++. So it's going to print and then increase. That'll be another 49. And then the final value of a is 50. Okay? And we can see, in this case, this is where the unary operators get kind of useful, in that you don't have to do them by themselves. You can, if you feel so inclined, you can put them inside of other expressions. Okay, so we start with a is 47. We print that out. We increase it by 1. I'm just going to highlight as we go down. So we start out with a is 47. We increase it by 1. Or we print the value. We increase it by 1. And then we print the new value. Okay, so we go from 47 to 48. Then we're going to go with that plus plus a. That'll go from 48 to 49, which we then print. And then we go that a++. So we're going to stay at, so we're going to print the current value and then increase. So it'll go from 49 to 50, but we print out a 49. And then finally, that final value of a, we're just going to print that out regular. Okay, this is a thing that mostly you'll just have to spend some time with, and that's all right. And if we go, there you go. The way that I pull that out is by hitting tab a couple of times. Okay, and so here we have, so we start with 10, and this line of code is pretty much exactly the same as what you saw before. Okay, and then the difference is we're going to print out num, we'll print out result. It's exactly the same as what you saw before. We'll just run it and make sure that our math is right. Okay, so our final value is 10, and our result is 44, just like what we have here. So that's good news. And here in a second we'll be back in full screen mode. Okay. Now, with the unary operators, you can put your unary operators in the middle of other expressions, of other assignments, and so on. You can do that if you feel so inclined. The thing to recognize, though, is that it's really obnoxious to do that, and it makes programs that are harder to very quickly read and understand. And that's one of the things that we want to do when we're writing our software, is make sure that we're writing software that's really easy to quickly read and understand if we want to go back and make changes to it. Which is to say that most of the time that you use the unary operator, the vast majority of the time, you're going to see those just on their own lines. And if it's on its own line, it doesn't particularly matter if you use the prefix or the postfix, because there's nothing else on that line. And there aren't any other operations, so those have effectively the same level of precedence in terms of operator precedence. But when we have things like this expression, it matters a lot more. But almost always, almost 99.9% of the time, you won't have to do things like this. And the reason that you won't have to do things like this is because there will be easier and more transparent ways to write this particular piece of code. So with unary operators, in terms of some best practices, the thing that I'm going to suggest is don't get clever. Don't feel like you need to, don't put your unary operators inside of if statements, don't put them inside of loop conditions, don't put them inside of more complicated math unless you absolutely have to. And the number of times that you absolutely have to is going to be remarkably close to 0. Instead, use those unary operators on their own lines by themselves in order to count up or count down. And certainly only use them if you're counting up or down by 1. If you're counting up or down by 3, just use the compound assignment, or just do something like x is equal to x plus 3, or something like that. So that'll make your life a lot easier. Unary operators are designed to save time in terms of typing your code, which is to say, and so if we save time by typing that code, we should also make sure that we're not giving up that time plus more by writing really difficult to read code. Instead, we should strive to make our code as readable as possible, which is to say that with unary operators, generally your best bet is to only use them on their own lines. When we come back, we'll talk a bit more about variable swapping.